All right, Michigan just wrapped up their open practice to the public today, Sam. There were some observations that we got to point out. Some guys look bigger, smaller, and that's a good thing. The first guy that really stood out to me, I think, is a guy that's, the coaches mentioned last week, Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah.
He just looks the part so far this spring.
Yeah, they said he's having a fantastic spring ball. You should expect it after how he really broke onto the depth chart last year. As a guy that, it was effort, strength for his size. Now you add some real mass to it. He looks like he's a good 270, 280 out there. So you got to feel good about how that position group is coming along, because Luigi Villain is back and looking bigger and stronger. It looks like he's about 265, I think they said. So, that's a position group that's going to take some time to see how it develops. But you see the foundation there. You see the athleticism there for the guys to come in, and at least for it to not be this precipitous drop that you expect it to be when you see all those guys going to the pros. So granted, they have to prove it on the field, but at least in practice, the look test, the eyeball test, speed and quickness and size, you saw a lot of that on the defensive line today.
Let's switch it over to the offensive line. Michael Onwenu looks a little slimmer. Ed Warner mentioned that last week. And then, of course, there's a stiff competition there at right tackle.
Yeah, so Big Mike is not quite as big, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
When you consider he came into Michigan at over 380 pounds. Got down to around 360. I don't know where he is. If I had to guess, I would say it was probably somewhere in the 350 range. But it's the distribution and how well he moves. And you could really see a quickness improvement in Mike Onwenu. Now, we'll have to wait to see in actual games to see what the endurance looks like. But as far as his ability to just move in space, which those guys are going to have to do a lot of, he showed well there. And then, some of the young guys that they've been talking about, was really impressed with the size and strength gains for Jalen Mayfield, who last year was 270, 280. He's up to 311 now. You can really see it.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Hayes, who comes in as a tight end at around 240. He looks like he's about 260, 270 now. So the weight is steadily creeping up. And that right tackle battle is one to really watch. You couldn't really glean anything today because they weren't in pads. But Andrew Stuber, playing time experience, he comes in with a bit of an advantage there. But what you got to love about Jalen Mayfield, and you see it even in a practice like this, and just the attitude that he brings to the table, the dog that he plays with, I think that one's going to be hard to keep the young fella down. I mean, he doesn't have the experience, but he has the size now at 311. He has that dog mentality, and that's something that I know Ed Warner really appreciates.
Yeah, Ed Warner mentioned that last week, up from 285 last season to now, 307, like you said. So that's going to be a competition that's going to go all the way through the summer into fall camp. And there's a couple defensive guys we have to point out. We were looking at some of the defensive backs. No Lavert Hill today,
right,
but Ambry Thomas looks to solidify himself as the other corner out there. And then a guy that didn't play last year, but Vincent Gray, a guy that they mentioned, some of the coaches, Don Brown mentioned him earlier this camp as a guy that's standing out.
Yeah, so, Vincent, I mean, you expect Ambry to be ready to step up, right? And he's a guy that in practice you can get a real good gauge of if you're the coaches, because he's going against Tariq Black.
Right.
So he's getting a real test. The tough thing, I think, from a defensive back perspective, for them to evaluate is so many receivers missing. No DPJ, no Nico Collins. I mean, that you're down a couple of big-time guys there. So, as you dig deeper into that depth chart, you aren't going against that top-shelf guy quite as often. Mm-hmm. And that makes it a little bit harder to read. But the reason why, I'm a little bit more confident in some of the takes that we're getting on Vincent Gray, so you go back to last year's Notre Dame game. You remember we were down in South Bend, and Vincent Gray trots out on the the pregame warm-ups. He made the travel squad as a true freshman. He was not an early enrollee, like for instance, Spider was an early enrollee. I mean, you had other corners on the roster that he passed as a guy who just got there. So he brings you his size at about 6'2" and some change. Some good speed. He plays physical, starting to pick things up. So got to be pleased with his progress. But clearly to me, as I come out of this practice, I'm coming out of it talking about the quarterbacks. Shea Patterson, of course, in 7-on-7. You expect Shea to feel comfortable in this offense, and you can really see it in 7-on-7. They aren't doing as fast a pace and that kind of deal, but still. a guy who can take the snap, go through his progressions. He did that. His best pass of the day, he went to his first option, or he looked at his first option, came off of it, found Oliver Martin on a crossing route about 15 yards down the field. It was a guy who was comfortable with the progressions. You also can kind of see that with Dylan McCaffrey is getting there. And there's small sample space for us, so who knows how it's looking in practice. But I feel like it's getting there with Joe. It's obviously already there with Shea. And, of course, we saw Dylan play last year.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the quarterbacks. Obviously, Shea's got the number one job. We all expect that. But that battle for the number 2 position is going to be clearly between Dylan McCaffrey and Joe Milton. And I think the one play that really stood out is that we saw that play. It was like a 15 to 20-yard rope down the middle into a tight box.
You're talking about that Joe threw.
That Joe threw that was just, picturesque. It was just a beautiful throw. Probably the best pass I saw.
Well, that you have to have a howitzer to complete. I mean,
it was cannon up here.
It was through traffic, and you're right. That's the thing that mesmerizes you about Joe Milton. He can make a throw like that, but to do it consistently, that's what you're working on with him. Whereas, you're going to get some consistency from a starter like Shea, who's been through it before, and then, of course, Dylan has some experience under his belt. But the raw tools, Joe Milton definitely has them. But the best pass, you thought that was the best pass of the day when Joe threw. I thought it was up there. Best pass I saw today was Cade McNamara. Cade, again, a guy who we saw in high school, we saw on the camp circuit, we saw him down at the opening finals in Dallas. He throws really well on the run, but his touch on the deep ball is something that stands out. And we've been hearing a lot about the young fella, the young tight end, Eric All. He gets out on an out and up, kind of a vertical route, and it was a perfect teardrop pass from Cade McNamara down the sideline to Eric All behind the defense. To me, for what was the best pass of the day. So encouraging to see how in practice, in drills, you got to temper your enthusiasm about all of this because it's just practice, it's just drills. But I thought Cade McNamara showed well today.
And fittingly, that pass ended the practice session, so that's going to end our recap here. Look for all our coverage and more on the MichiganInsider.com.